Hi, folks. Today I have a story lesson for you. Some people have been asking me for the type of lessons where I just tell you a story about something from history or from science, and so that's what this is. Today we're going to talk about Smilodon, or a saber-toothed tiger, although the name saber-toothed tiger isn't really accurate because they weren't a type of tiger. So, this is that. Smilodon was a very large cat with saber teeth, so the big giant teeth that stick out the front of their face and come way down here. And Smilodon lived for a pretty large period of time in history, but all of this time was before humans were around. So we need to go way back to when the ice ages were coming in from the north and covering all of Canada and part of the United States in giant sheets of ice. And we're going to talk about the area down below there in the lower part of the United States where Smilodon fossils have been found in huge numbers. And just an interesting fact, if you want to go off and do some research, there have been many, many, many different types of saber-toothed cats throughout history. And there have even been some saber-toothed not cats that have existed in different places during ancient history as well. So those might be things you want to investigate. For now, we're just going to talk about Smilodon. So Smilodon's body, we know from the fossils, was probably a little bit bigger than a tiger's is now, which means bigger than any of the cats we have today. And their canines, their top ones right here, those teeth were about 8 inches long when they were full grown, which is about the length of my hand from the beginning of my hand to the tip of my middle finger. That is a very long tooth to be sticking out your face. And because Smilodon, our saber-toothed tigers, had these big giant teeth sticking out the front of their face, they lived a life that is somewhat similar to modern wildcats, but also kind of different because they couldn't hunt the same way that our modern cats do because they had these big giant fang teeth sticking out the front. So we're going to talk about them a bit. Now, one of the reasons we can talk about Smilodon so much and know so much about it is because in California, there's this place called the La Brea Tar Pits. And this is a place where way back when Smilodon and mammoths and all sorts of things were wandering around this country, there was a tar pit where they would get stuck and die and their bones would be preserved. And because so many Smilodons got stuck and died and had their bones preserved in this tar pit, folks have been able to go learn a lot about them because there are so many leftover bones. So maybe someday if you go on a trip, you might like to go see the museum that's in California near where the tar pits are and see some Smilodon fossils. We might even have some in some museums around here. I'm not sure. That's going to be something to investigate when we're, getting out of the house again. But for now, let's just talk about what their life was like. So we know that their body shape was a little bit like stockier and wider than lions and tigers now. They weren't as good for long running, but they were really, really strong. And they had extra strong neck muscles right in here because their skull was so big and huge and they had the big chompy teeth. They needed extra strong neck muscles there. We know that their mouth, their jaw, could open to about 90 degrees. That's this far open. So if you imagine this is the mouth closed, that's open 90 degrees. You cannot open your mouth 90 degrees. I'm not going to do it on camera, but I invite you to go try to open your mouth 90 degrees. It's not going to happen because that's not how your skull is made. But in order for something with big chompy fangs to be able to even get food in there and do any biting to hunt, they needed to have mouths that opened really, really far. So that's another interesting thing about them. Now, if you look at modern cats like lions and tigers and jaguars and all of those things, when they kill their prey, they almost always kill it by suffocating. Suffocating means not getting enough air until the thing dies. So they'll grab onto the neck of the thing they're hunting, like an antelope or a deer or whatever it might be, and they will crunch the neck until the creature that is their prey can't breathe and dies. And often, I didn't know this, often they don't even break the skin of the animal's neck. They're just crunching down and holding it until it can't breathe and it dies, which is really interesting to me because I always imagined things like lions and tigers hunting involving a lot of like ripping and shredding. Turns out that's not actually how it goes most of the time, but it is how it worked for Smilodon. So because of those big giant fang teeth sticking out the front, Smilodon wouldn't have the ability to crunch onto something's neck and just hold it squished like that. Where would the teeth go? So instead, the way that Smilodon normally hunted, scientists think, is by grabbing part of the neck and just tearing it right out, like sticking those fangs in, snatching a bunch of the flesh off of that animal and ripping it out, and then just kind of like standing around and watching while the animal bled to death. Which is super gruesome, but sometimes science is super gruesome, and this is how they got their food. So it is what it is. We know that they had to hunt in this way that is totally different than how wildcats hunt now, which means there've got to be some other differences too, right? So let's kind of follow those ideas for a minute. When folks have looked at the Smilodon fossils in the La Brea tar pits, one of the really amazing things they've discovered is that there are fossils of bones where the bones broke, and broke in big, bad ways, where like the animal would not have been able to walk. It would have just been sitting there hurting. But as a bone heals, it starts to look different. So they've found bones from Smilodon legs that had a really bad break, and then the break healed. Now let's think about that for a minute, because that says a huge thing about how Smilodon lived their life. This means that they weren't living alone. And this means that they gave some degree of care to each other. Because if a big, large, saber-toothed cat breaks its leg, it can't go hunt. It's going to slowly die unless someone else brings it food. Which means that some of these Smilodon, maybe not that often, but some of them, because there are fossils, had to get injured and then be taken care of by their friends and family long enough for those injuries to heal and them to get back and be able to do the hunting themselves again. So scientists believe that Smilodon probably lived in a pack, similar to how lions do now. Because if they lived solitary, all alone, like a tiger does, and they got injured, they would just die. So that, I think, is just amazingly cool. We know that way back then, these early cats were already forming groups like lions do now and taking care of each other. They've also found on some of the bones some wounds on a saber-toothed cat's bone that were made by a saber-toothed tooth, which means that they were fighting each other sometimes too. And in general, these wounds are on what they think are the skulls and the bones of males that were fighting, which would totally match up with how lions live their lives now, because we know that there's one male who like runs the pride, and all the younger males either have to leave or fight him to take over. And so we figure that maybe the Smilodon had a similar sort of pride structure where the males would fight each other for who got to be in charge. And that's how those wounds, scrapes on bones made by saber teeth happened to be on saber-toothed animals. Now, a couple other really cool things. This is more about like how they went away. And this is new science, because when I learned about this stuff when I was your age, I was taught that all of these animals went extinct because the climate changed as the ice sheets were receding, going back up north and coming back south as they were spreading back and forth. And all of that craziness and the changing climate over the time that they were living in meant that eventually they couldn't get enough food. And so they went extinct because of that. But here's the thing. Scientists are thinking that right now, for Smilodon at least, that might not really have been what happened. This is brand new, like in the last 10 years, and people are still researching it science, which is really fun for me because new science, right? So they thought that Smilodon was this big, massive thing. It needed to eat big, massive things in order to get enough food. And so if the climate changed and their prey started to be less common, like the big mammoths they wanted to eat and things like that, that then the Smilodon population would slowly shrink as there was less and less food for them, and eventually that's how they went extinct. But here's the thing about animals. When animals have tons of stuff to hunt and it's not a problem for them to get enough food, they almost never super chew the bones of their kill. So if a pack of lions now, a pride of lions, goes and hunts a gazelle and they have plenty of food, they got something the other day, they're not even like feeling starving or anything like that, then they'll eat the good parts of the meat. And if there's enough to go around, they won't bother putting in the work to like munch the bones and crack them open and get the good stuff inside. However, if a pride of lions is hunting during a time when there's not as much food, when they're having a hard time catching prey and they're all feeling hungry, then they're more likely to sit around and crunch the bones to get the last little bit of food out. Kind of like if you have a sandwich for lunch and you have a bunch of other things, you probably won't worry about like the little bit of peanut butter stuck to the edge of your container. But if all you had was that sandwich and you were really hungry, you might, use your finger to get that leftover bit of peanut butter. Kind of like that, except with bones. So in theory, if Smilodon was starting to go extinct because there wasn't enough food, then the bones of things that got killed by a Smilodon, which scientists can tell were killed by a Smilodon because they have Smilodon marks from their big stabby teeth on their bones, we would start to see that towards the end of the time period when Smilodon was living, that the bones of their prey would start to be more chewed open, more cracked, and there would be more marks on the teeth from chomping those bones, because chomping bones like that causes little bits of damage to teeth. And they don't see that. When scientists go and look at the teeth of the Smilodon, especially the late ones towards when they were getting close to being extinct, they aren't seeing any more of that damage from bone chopping than they ever did during the earlier times when Smilodon was doing great. So that kind of leads to the idea that something went wrong, but didn't have to do with them slowly starving because there wasn't enough prey, which leaves this huge mystery. What happened? Why did they go extinct? Maybe the prey thing was part of it, but it couldn't be the whole reason. Otherwise, all the teeth from the late Smilodons would have the marks and breaks and damages from doing the bone chomping, and they don't. They don't have that, which means we don't know why they went extinct. It is a huge, giant mystery, and I love it. That's basically what I know right now. There's more information out there, but it's still changing. So when you go and look for information, if you do, about Smilodon, check the date that the articles you're reading were written. If they are more than 10 or 15 years old, they're probably not very valid anymore. This is a place where a lot of new things are being learned. You can read the old stuff, but keep in mind when you read newer things, it might be different. Now, one last thing I want to talk to you about that I thought was really interesting is that they do find a lot more broken teeth in Smilodon fossils than they do in fossils of non-saber-toothed cats. Excuse me, my voice is going all weird. Okay, we're good. So they find a lot more broken teeth, and they thought at first that maybe it was from the bone chomping thing. They thought, oh, the bone chomping is real. They were starving to death. But the teeth aren't broken in the way that they break, in the way that a tooth breaks from chomping on lots of bones, which is lots of little slow breakages. They're more just like snapped straight off. And so some tests were done, some weird scientific tests, to figure out why Smilodon has so many broken teeth. Now, if you stop and think about it, you might actually just come up with the answer because it's one that kind of makes sense. Let's think about breaking things. If you have a wee little pencil stub that is only this long and you try to snap it, there's not much to snap. But if you have a pencil that is this long, all of us could break this pencil in half without much trouble. It's like that for their teeth too. Even though Smilodon had crazy, big, strong teeth, they weren't strong enough to survive some of the hunting that happened. So when scientists looked into this, they started by looking at some smaller creatures. And one of the ones they looked at was a fox, like a red fox that we would have in modern time. And it turns out that the teeth of a red fox can handle 7 times the fox's weight before they break. So the fox can grab onto something, and unless more than 7 times its weight worth of pressure is put on the teeth will be fine. As an animal gets bigger, they weigh more, and the teeth strength can't keep up with it. So a modern lion, its teeth can only support 4 times its own weight. That's still a lot of weight, but it's not as great as what the fox could support. Smilodon fossils, it's showing us that probably their teeth could only support 2 times their own weight, twice what their weight is. Which means that if the Smilodon hunted something large, which we know they did, and the thing weighed 2 or more times what the Smilodon weighed, which we know sometimes they did, that then that weight would be strong enough to snap the Smilodon's teeth. And so currently, that's what scientists are thinking has caused so many broken saber teeth to be found in the fossils. They don't think it was bone chewing. They don't think it's because the Smilodon were slowly starving. They think it's just because they had really big teeth and they weren't strong enough to hold up to it. All right, folks, that is a story with absolutely no writing, nothing but just talking. Let me know, please, if you feel like this was nice and you liked it, or if you feel like it helps you stay focused to have the writing on the board. Because I normally do the writing on the board, but this was kind of an experiment for me too. So let me know. Figure out how you want to follow up. Maybe you want to go measure what 8 inches looks like, walk around, find a whole bunch of other things that are 8 inches long, and then have that image in your head of all of these things were about the length of a Smilodon tooth. Maybe you want to, if your pet is really chill, measure like the canine of your dog and see how long their canines are. You can measure your own canine, but our canines aren't really for hunting, so they're not very impressive. Maybe you want to go do some research into the ice ages and the sort of creatures that were around when Smilodon was living, the things it was hunting. For instance, we know about woolly mammoths. That's an animal that people talk about. But did you know that there were a lot of things that were kind of like woolly mammoths, big elephant-ish shaped creatures, and some of them were even larger? Maybe that's something you want to study. Maybe you want to investigate the crazy saber-toothed things that were not cats that existed in mostly Australia, I think. Go forth, learn some things, and if you don't want to investigate more, remember that you can just draw some pictures or write down some notes. If you feel like, oh my goodness, writing notes about this, I can't remember what you said. Guess what? It's a video. You can start it over. Have a good day. I miss you all.